Call to order. Work session of the Laramie City Council at 6 p.m., the 28th day of March, 2023. For the work session, Historic Preservation, Albany County Historic Preservation Board for West Side Neighborhood for research to become an historic district. First, City Clerk, if you could read the public hearing notice.
Thank you, Mayor. Notice is hereby given that between the 6th day of January 2023 and the 14th day of February 2023, the following have filed applications for renewal of liquor licenses in the office of the City Clerk of City of Laramie, Wyoming, for the following described places and premises: retail liquor licenses, Laramie Lanes, High Plains Investment, LLC, doing business as Mulligan's, Walmart Stores, Incorporated, doing business as Walmart Superstore number 1412, Hensley Property Holdings, LLC, doing business as Roxy's on Grand, Coyote Land Incorporation, doing business as Cowboy Saloon and Dance Hall, E&K Smith Enterprises, doing business as Alibi Wood Fire Pizza and Bakery, Big D Oil Company, doing business as Big D Oil, Copper's Bar, LLC, doing business as Copper's Liquor Lounge, Electra Property Holdings, LLC, doing business as Bud's Bar, Safeway Stores 46, Inc., doing business as Safeway Stores 46, Sweet Melissa's, Inc., doing business as Sweet Melissa's Cafe and Front Street Tavern, A&B Laramie, Wyoming, LLC, doing business as Applebee's Neighborhood Grill and Bar, Jazza Inc., doing business as Reed's Liquor, Corner Pocket of Laramie Inc., doing business as Mingles of Laramie, WRCH Laramie, LLC, doing business as Wyoming's Rib and Chop House, Buckhorn Enterprises Inc., doing business as Buckhorn Bar, SDR LLC, doing business as O'Dwyer's, AKME LLC, doing business as The Still, Ridley's Family Market Inc., doing business as Ridley's Family Markets, Wagon Wheel Inc., doing business as Wagon Wheel, Gateway Fields LLC, doing business as Gateway Liquors, First Street Station Inc., doing business as Altitudes Chop House and Brewery, Ranger Liquor Mart LLC, doing business as Ranger Liquor Mart and Bar, Northridge Discount Liquors Inc., doing business as Northridge Discount Liquors, Yasau Inc., doing business as Third Street Bar and Grill, Crow Bar and Grill LLC, doing business as Crow Bar and Grill, Chalk and Cheese LLC, doing business as Chalk and Cheese. Restaurant liquor licenses include Bernie's Mexican Restaurant LLC, doing business as Bernie's Mexican Restaurant, Garin Enterprises Inc., doing business as Coal Creek Coffee, Australius Inc., doing business as Andale Rapido, Villas Inc., doing business as Corona Village, Bighorn Associates LC, doing business as Chili's Grill, Yellow Star Restaurants Inc., doing business as Miso Sushi, Anong's Thai Cuisine LLC, doing business as Anong's Thai Cuisine, Nico Sushi and Japanese Food LLC, doing business as Nico Sushi and Steak, Jay's Prairie Rose Inc., doing business as Jerry's Prairie Rose Cafe, Palermo's Italian Restaurant LLC, doing business as Palermo's Italian Restaurant, The Bistro LLC, doing business as Second Street Deli, Night Heron Enterprises LLC, doing business as Night Heron Books and Coffee House, Garin Enterprises Inc., doing business as Coal Creek Coffee, Movie Palace Inc., doing business as Studio City UW Plaza Cinemas, Eat Sleep Barbecue LLC, doing business as Dickey's Barbecue Pit, Bijou 2 Inc., doing business as Bijou Duo, Pamela J. Delgado Garcia, doing business as Garcia's Mexican Restaurant, 17 Cafe LLC, doing business as 17th Street Cafe. Bar and Grill liquor licenses include Sherlock Investments LLC, doing business as the Library Restaurant, or the Library Sports Grill and Brewery. Sushi Boat LLC, doing business as Sushi Boat. Shull Reese LLC, doing business as Born in a Barn. Accomplice Laramie LLC, doing business as Accomplice Micro Pub. 11T Billion LLC, doing business as Lovejoy's Bar and Grill. Microbrewery licenses include First Street Station, Inc., doing business as Altitude Chop House and Brewery. Sherlock Investments LLC, doing business as the Library Sports Grill and Brewery. Coal Creek Tap Incorporated, doing business as Coal Creek Tap. Bonds Brewing Company LLC, doing business as Bonds Brewing Company. Club Limited liquor licenses include Laramie Moose Lodge, number 390, Loyal Order of Moose, BPO Elks Lodge, number 582, Laramie Elks Club, Hoosted Pendleton Post, number 14, American Legion, Fraternal Order of Eagles, area number 3493, Veterans of Foreign Wars, post number 2221, Jacoby Golf Club, Timberline Hospitalities, which is actually Safari Timberline LLC, doing business as Holiday Inn, Hotel Investment Services, GI Incorporated, doing business as Hilton Garden Inn. Special malt beverage permits include the trustees of the University of Wyoming, doing business as the University of Wyoming Union Building. Roxy's Catering LLC, doing business as Roxy's Catering. In 2 locations, the Arena Auditorium and the Stadium. And the winery being the Great Untamed LLC, doing business as the Great Untamed. On the 23rd day of February, we received a bar and grill liquor license for Maria's Mexican Grill and Cantina, doing business as Maria's Mexican Grill and Cantina. On the 28th day of February, we received an application for bar and grill liquor license from San Luis Mexican Restaurant LLC, doing business as San Luis Mexican Restaurant. Public hearing to hear comments and protests relative to the renewals of these licenses will be held Tuesday, March 28th, 2023 at 6:00 p.m. in council chambers of City Hall, 406 Ivinson Avenue via Zoom. Licenses will be considered for renewal at the regular meeting of the City Council on Tuesday, April 4th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. in council chambers, 406 Ivinson Avenue and via Zoom. All information relative to this matter is available for review at the City of Laramie City Clerk's office at 406 Ivinson Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming. Anyone wishing to be heard should be present or may be represented by his or her agent at the meeting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, City Clerk. Next, we'd like to open the floor to public comment on non-agenda items. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any person wishing to speak either within the audience, come to the podium, and then we'll go to Zoom if there are any hands raised.
So, Vice Mayor, we may want to close the public hearing or ask for
Oh.
comments on the public hearing.
I closed the public hearing. Do we have any comment? I'm sorry, I'm out of order. Do we have any comments on the public hearing? Seeing none, I invite Dr. Vicente to return to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I didn't prepare any formal remarks, and I certainly didn't time them, so I'll try to keep within.
You'll be okay.
Okay, I want to raise some issues about renting and about renters' problems, and I've talked to people directly about some of these. I've managed 2 rental properties in Laramie. That doesn't make me an expert, but I try to do it well. So one of the things is, when I was showing one property, a student came in to look at the property and said, oh, well, and I had copies of the lease for them to look at right there. And the student said, oh, well, I don't know if I should mention where, but someplace the student was looking at wouldn't give them a copy of the lease until they agreed to sit down and sign it. And I said, that is not right. Consumers have a right to information. And this, especially young people who are maybe, getting involved in renting and leases for the first time. And you need to read these things carefully. So that's one concern about not having information ahead of time. Then the second concern is that I read some things about the law, that a landlord can put a clause in the lease that says, if I'm not responsible for all these things that the statute says landlords are responsible for, like heat, plumbing, such and such. And I've heard this from a number of, from repair people who've said, I've gone into a house and these people haven't had heat for not only days, but sometimes several weeks with little children. And apparently there's, the intention of the law was that if somebody has a cabin and they don't have plumbing or they don't have a central heating system, they can say that they aren't providing it. But if somebody moves in and these things are there and they expect to have them, and then find out when they break that they are responsible. So again, I understand that renters have to read the lease carefully, but if they can't get it ahead of time, or they can't show it to somebody else who knows more than they do about it, that's a problem. Then the third concern is that I was working with an older man who has some limitations physically, and sometimes he's confused maybe from his drugs. And he was without heat for several days, and he said, I am afraid of the man who's supposed to be fixing things. He has been intimidating, and I'm afraid to talk with him. And finally, I called APS about that to get help for him. But he couldn't do that himself because he was afraid. So there, and then I've also run into people who say, what if I do complain? I know this new ordinance says I can, but I'm kind of worried about what might happen. Maybe they'll find something I'm not doing right. And I know the law outlines what you have to do to have standing to make a complaint against something not working. And that's probably more than 3 minutes. But any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Vicente, for coming. We appreciate your bringing this to our attention and taking the time out of your evening. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Are there any on Zoom, City Clerk?
I see no hands raised on Zoom, Mayor.
Seeing none, I open the work session and invite Karen Bard to the podium, and if you could introduce your presentation tonight.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor and council members. So I'm Karen Bard. I am the chair of the Albany County Historic Preservation Board, and I have with me 3 of our other board members. We have Gwendolyn Christie, who will be doing the presentation this evening. She has been doing the bulk of all of the research and the work and the grant writing for this project, and she is also a resident of the West Side area. And we have Mary Hopkins, and we have Eric Sandine with us. So depending on your questions, hopefully we have the expertise to answer those for you this evening. Now a little bit of background on this. We have been working with the county commissioners, and I had been trying to keep Andy in the loop as to where we were late last year on this. We are wanting to investigate putting forward the West Side as a historic district, and from that we needed to do some research on the boundaries, the defining of that, the contributing buildings, laying all that groundwork. We got the approval from the county commissioners to put forward a grant request to the State Historic Preservation Office. We did that. We received our grant. It was our intention from the very beginning that we would seek the like and kind contribution for that about half from the city and half from the county, since the west side sits in both jurisdictions. But when it came, and we actually received the grant in December, but when we went to accept that grant in February, March, basically, we were standing in a position that we had not received any interaction or support with the city council members. And so therefore, we didn't have your support to move forward. Therefore, we declined the grant, and we gave it back to the State Historic Preservation Office, and I started investigating what I needed to do to engage with you. I was hoping to be able to do that through Andy, and that just didn't quite work out. I have never engaged with you guys before, so this is a learning experience for me. But what we would like to do is to go through our presentation with you to outline what it is our objectives are with this grant, and to try and seek some support and clarification for any of your questions. So with that, I would like to just turn it over to Gwendolyn, and she will go through the presentation, and then we'll take all of your questions and hopefully be able to answer them and satisfy anything that you have going on. Gwendolyn?
Good evening. My name is Gwendolyn Christie. I am the current secretary on the County Historic Preservation Board, and I'm also an archaeologist and historic preservationist by profession. I just want to give you all a little overview of what our board does, what our goals are generally, and some of the projects that we're working on. We were founded in 1985 to protect and enhance Albany County's historic, archaeological, and cultural heritage. We seek to stabilize and improve property values, foster civic pride, promote the use of historic structures, sites, districts for educational purposes. We seek to protect, enhance, and perpetuate Albany County's cultural, social, political, engineering, geological, paleontological, and architectural history. Our board is in the process of establishing a 5-year historic preservation plan that falls in line with these objectives. Some of the current projects we are working on is the historic preservation plan that I just mentioned. This will establish a vision for the future of historic preservation in our county, and it includes both the Laramie area as well as the rural parts of our county. The plan is to increase awareness of historic preservation in the community with objectives that will strengthen historic preservation efforts. We're also working on the 2023 Historic Preservation Month event. If you don't know, May is Historic Preservation Month every year, and us, along with several organizations, usually hold events. And then our third large project is this West Side Neighborhood District Nomination Project that I'm talking about tonight. I'd like to give you a little background information on this project. This has been a project that's been ongoing by one entity or another for well over a decade at this point. There have been 2 cultural resource inventories conducted within the neighborhood. The first was conducted by the University of Wyoming's American Studies program, and they inventoried all blocks in the neighborhood south of Clark Street, west of the railroad, and east of the river, and this was conducted around 2010. A second inventory of cultural resources in the neighborhood was conducted around the same time on all blocks north of Clark Street, west of the railroad, and east of the Laramie by Robert and Elizabeth Rosenberg. So therefore, we have 2 inventories that cover much of the neighborhood, and these were conducted about 13 years ago. So our board decided to pick up and try to finish this project. Both of these ended with those inventories. They didn't move forward with a district nomination, and so we decided that we would try to work on that. So some of the recent steps we've taken to kickstart this project. On December 2nd, 2021, our board held a West Side Neighborhood Town Hall at the Lincoln Community Center to have a community-based discussion about historic preservation in our neighborhood. The meeting was more broadly about our historic preservation plan, but much of the conversation centered on the potential National Register Historic District. Councilor Andy Somerville attended the meeting, and all residents of the neighborhood received a physical invitation to this meeting. The outcome of the meeting was that all attendees were in favor of our board pursuing a grant to pursue this possible district nomination. Therefore, our board began the process of establishing a statement of work for the project and initiated the grant application process that Karen spoke about. We did this all with the approval of the county commissioners. On December 13th, 2022, we received that grant funding, and then it became clear that we didn't quite have the support from the city that we were looking for to pursue the project. Therefore, I would like to present some information regarding the details of what the proposed project is, what a National Register Historic District is, and how it relates to our city code. Our board, some members of our board met with the city planners on February 21st to ensure that we were all on the same page about how our city code reads. First, I'd like to go over what a National Register of Historic Places District is. The National Register of Historic Places is the official list of our nation's places that are worthy of preservation. This list is managed by the National Park Service. The definition of that district is on the screen, and I'm not going to read it out loud, but the West Side neighborhood represents a period of development in Laramie as a railroad town. The neighborhood originally housed workers that were employed by the Union Pacific Railroad and industrial plants on the west side of town. Historically, this neighborhood was almost entirely working class and consisted of ethnic minorities. And so what ties this neighborhood together as something that we would consider a district is not necessarily its architectural prowess, but the social history of the neighborhood. Some common misconceptions I'd like to clear up ahead of time about National Register districts are that listing an individual structure or a historic district on the National Register severely restricts the rights of the private property owner. While this may be the case in some areas where local city or county codes are restrictive, this is not the case in Laramie or in Albany County. Listing a structure or a district on the National Register in Laramie only initiates review and potential protection from federal actions. So only if there's a federal nexus to a project would the listing of a district really have an effect on something moving forward, potentially. Really, it would just invite consideration of that district. Listing a property does not restrict the rights of the private property owner in Laramie, Wyoming. There is minimal city code related to historic preservation in our city, and the code is under a section called Historic Preservation under Demolition Controls for Historic Structures. And the code reads, no structure designated as a historic structure on the National Register or on the Wyoming State Inventory or is designated as a contributing structure to any district shall be demolished unless the owner has first given the city at least 6 months' notice of his or her intention to demolish the building. During that 6-month period, the city shall work with the owner to identify any alternative uses that would allow the existing building to produce a better economic return, that would allow it to remain active in use, or that would allow it to be used for the purposes or land uses that the owner wants to achieve, or to identify a purchaser for the building who would preserve it from demolition. In the event that the owner does not accept the alternatives, if any, offered by the city during the 6-month period, the demolition demolition may proceed, but only after the owner has provided at least 30 days additional time for the city or other parties to document the building through photographs or other means. The owner is encouraged, but not required, to allow access to the building during that 30-day period in order to allow documentation of the interior of the building as well. Therefore, the city code does not prohibit or restrict the rights of a property owner. It allows for a grace period in which documentation can be gathered prior to destruction. Furthermore, this only applies to structures that contribute to the historic district. The project that our board wants to undertake would identify all contributing and non-contributing structures to the district, thus simplifying the process for the city. We hope this clarification helps to ease some minds and clear up any misconceptions. Now I'd like to talk specifically about the project itself as related to the statement of work that you were provided. This project includes numerous public meetings, including a public kickoff meeting and a public information meeting to continue throughout consultation with community members and other interested individuals. That is how that's how we see the project starting, with public interest meetings with the community or anyone who's interested in attending. And we would hope that those meetings can continue to clear up any misconceptions about what a National Register district is. The overall goal of the project is to have the research and some fieldwork conducted by a qualified contractor to determine whether a district nomination would be successful. This would include the collection of archival research and oral interviews with members of the community. The project would also include gathering groups of individuals to document the historic structures in the neighborhood. They were documented 13 years ago. There's certainly been numerous changes, and some updated documentation will be needed. The project also will include the establishment of a district boundary based upon a period of significance for the neighborhood. That period of significance will be determined from the historical research that needs to be conducted as part of the project, as will the boundary. We cannot yet say what an appropriate district boundary would be until the appropriate research is done. But I did include a map in the materials for tonight of all the known documented historic buildings in the neighborhood. Some of our next steps, how we would like to move forward with this project, would be to apply for the same grant that we applied for last year. This has a need for matching funds. We would like to put out another request for proposals to get qualified contractors, and it would be very similar to the statement of work that's been provided. We're also considering applying for a Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund grant to make those matched funds. And we would like the project to begin in January of 2024. Are there any questions?
Councilors?
Do you want, who do you want to start with? Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for all the work. I want to make it clear that this council is not hostile to historic preservation. I've heard a couple times now that the council didn't support, but I've been here for four and a little years, and it's never come up as, would you support this thing? So I just want to make sure that you don't think that we oppose it, because I read a news article that made it sound like council opposed it, or just didn't support it. But, you know, our budgets are many years out, and so we have to know what we're putting money into ahead of time, and it has to be proposed. So I hope it's just a misunderstanding. I also think it's wonderful that you were able to invite everybody in the neighborhood. So it sounds like you've done a lot of the groundwork. What kind of turnout did you get for that? Like
Between 20 and 25. Yeah.
So I was thinking it's a pretty good sample size, but then the people that came would be people that were for historic preservation, but 100% of them is pretty promising. And what makes something historic? At what point does it become historic?
In most cases, if it's 50 years or older, there are some exceptions for things that could be nominated to the National Register, but generally something is considered historic according to our National Historic Preservation laws at 50 years or older.
May I ask one more?
Go ahead.
Can you give an example of what a federal nexus means? Like an example that I can't.
So maybe the federal government is funding a project, but they're not conducting the work. Maybe the city of Laramie wants to demolish the Lincoln Community Center, and the federal government is paying for it because it's going to be a new city building for whatever reason. That would be a federal nexus.
All right, thank you. That's it, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Gabriel?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I was just curious, could you take me through the process of what Councilor O'Doherty was talking about, the city process of not getting us involved? What happened there? Because this is my second term and I don't remember any discussion either.
Okay.
Do you know exactly what happened?
Yeah, so we had that public meeting in December of 2021. Councilor Andy Somerville was present at that meeting, and I think our assumption was that she was going to communicate on our behalf, and some things just fell through the cracks on that. And so I think there was just a general miscommunication between both of our groups.
And then going back to what Karen had said initially, that you had a grant and you sent it back because you didn't have city support. Can you expound a little bit more on that?
We just didn't want to move forward with a project that will affect the city without the city's support. Regardless of whether that would be financial support. We didn't ask for any financial support at the time, but we just wanted you on our side for it, and we wanted to make sure before we move forward.
Two more quick ones.
Okay.
And then talk a little bit about matching funds. What does that entail?
It's a little confusing, but the grant from the Wyoming State Historic Preservation Office, which is set aside for certified local governments, CLGs, which is what our organization is a 60-40 match. So they would give us 60% of the project funds, and we'd need to come up with whether it's in-kind labor or through other funding sources, the remaining 40% of the total cost of the project. For example, we got quotes between $35,000 and $45,000 for this project to have a contractor conduct the work. So they were giving us around, I don't remember.
Our 40% was around $13,000.
$13,000 that we needed to figure out how to cover.
Could be city, county.
It could be, yeah, or it could be done in kind with labor, which it certainly would, partially with all the volunteers will need to re-record all these buildings.
And then one final question, if you know the answer to this, about if somebody was going to do a remodeling project and it was totally out of character with the historic nature of their property, is that permitted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. My apologies for being on Zoom and being late. I literally just got off the plane from DC, so my sincere apologies to everybody here. So I want to add a few things to this discussion that I think is important to encapsulate everything if I can. So Mayor Harrington and I attended that meeting, and we started this process about 18 months ago, more formally with the Albany County Preservation Society's interest in that. There were two, essentially what the West Side neighbors have told Councilor Harrington and I is that they want protection from development. They don't want the type of buildings that have been built in that area to continue to be built, like the townhouses that are over there. There are two paths for that. One is Historic Preservation District. The other one is a historic overlay. That's different than the preservation designation. And so after that meeting, Mayor Harrington and I put on the council agenda a work session regarding this issue. And after speaking with planning staff and the city manager's office, they asked, planning wanted to do some public meetings before they brought that to council's discussion. that was on the list, and planning just has not had the time or the staff to get those public meetings done by planning. And so that kind of leads us to where we are today. That is still on planning's work agenda and work list, because those are two very different things. A historic overlay done by the city and the planning department can put some sideboards on the type of development and changes that are over there, but is not nearly as restrictive as the historic preservation. There was a lot of concern expressed, and frankly, in the last year to the mayor and I, from neighbors over there, about they did not want a historic preservation district because they didn't want to have to live by these rules and have the changes to their property come under this type of restriction and regulation. So that kind of leads us to where we're at now. It's on the planning department's list to bring forward to the council. It just hasn't happened yet.
I'd like to make a correction. The project that we are pursuing, a National Register Historic District, to get the neighborhood listed on the National Register of Historic Places, actually does not restrict anything. It's much less restrictive than a historic overlay. It only provides protections from the federal government.
Counselor?
Nancy, will you put up slide 6, please? I think it's 6. It's the common misconceptions. Yeah, thank you. I have a problem with the way the first one's wrote up there, and it's just my thoughts. Theoretically, would go, if I bought a place over there and I wanted to tear it down, there's restrictions on that. I couldn't just tear it down. I have to wait 6 months, right? And then an extra 30 days. So I would have to wait almost a year, 7 months before I could do anything, half a year, before I could do anything. To me, that's a restriction, right? So that's just kind of my thoughts on this when I first thought of this. I've also done some research as well, looking at places back home that tried to do this. And whatnot, to where I think there are, kind of like Councilor Somerville was saying, I think there are other restrictions that, if we do this, I can't go build townhomes over there, if I'm reading what I've been reading correctly. So I just have a problem with there are no restrictions, because I believe there are. Thank you.
Counselor Somerville?
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and sorry, I feel a little rushed coming to the meeting late, but I would say I've been a proponent of preservation for a while. I think that does a lot of good things. And I think as a council member, I had different hopes from where the reality sits today in terms of potentially doing a historic preservation district, and certainly the feedback from the neighborhood has been overwhelmingly negative. They would like to pursue the idea of a historic overlay. There's a couple of the things in the city ordinance that I just want to point out to the council that have been concerning to residents. One is number 4 is maintenance. Property owners shall be required to maintain historic buildings and structures as defined above in a state of normal repair and not allow demolition by neglect. Demolition by neglect is the gradual deterioration of a building when routine maintenance is not performed. The city shall have the authority to impose enforcement provisions on property owners who are found to have allowed a historic structure to fall into a state of neglect. And then number 5 is the neglect. Property owners of historic buildings and structures shall be required to keep them safe and fit for human habitation. The city shall have the authority to impose enforcement provisions of property owners who are not found to have allowed, or who have been found to allow an unsafe, insanitary, or dangerous condition to exist on their property. The provisions of subsection 1508.030E3C little 8 shall apply to any proposed demolition of such structure. I think those are the concerns when we gave the residents the options. Certainly when talking with the Westside League of Neighbors and some of the other residents over there, it's not just the 6-month grace period, it's we don't enforce state of property anywhere in the city. And so this would be, in terms of normal residential neighborhoods. And so what does that mean, number 4, number 5, in terms of maintenance and neglect, and what burden does it put on the property owners? I am still hopeful that we can probably get to a place of having at least some historic preservation designation on the west side. There are some incredibly important buildings over there, and certainly there's passion over there, but I don't know that in the way that it was researched and the way that it was moving forward, that we would have the neighborhood's support. That's been pretty clear to me, and certainly in the conversations that I've had with our planning office, that concern has made it to their ears as well. So I think some additional time, and I hope that's what those public meetings will bring us from the planning department, is a good opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about both options. You know, what if they want a historic overlay, you know, they have to decide what they want. Do they want to limit structure height? Do they want to limit the type of, you know, shingles you can have on the roof? Do they want to do that? And maybe for council members that haven't been around for a really long time, the council went through a similar process with a tree area overlay a number of years ago, more than 10 council years, maybe yet. And it started out with a lot of great energy and passion, and it ended up being years and years of work, and eventually died because the neighborhood came out and said they don't want it. And I think that's one of the big concerns about this, is making sure we've got the support to do it. So I really do appreciate what you guys are doing. I support preservation. I just don't know that we're there yet in terms of education and popular support.
I just wanted to,
Councilor Newman.
thank you. This is my ward, so I am going to reach out to some people. It sounds like you've had a lot more contact with them, so I'm kind of with you, Councilor Somerville, to where maybe these work sessions should help clear up some of that and help get me caught up more, and I'll probably reach out to you if that's okay. So, thank you, Vice Mayor.
Councilor O'Doherty.
I just wanted to clarify, what you were reading was if it's a historic overlay versus
Historic district.
So,
Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor Doherty, my apologies. What I was reading applies to the historic preservation designation, not the historic overlay. If I can just clarify, a historic overlay is essentially whatever the city writes it to be. We can write all the rules for that overlay, and that's what we're doing.
Any other comments or questions from council? Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, so just to add a little bit to what Andy said, just for clarification, to make sure that I'm getting it right. When Andy uses the word historic overlay, she's basically saying that the community should work with our planning department and with council members, et cetera, to come up with a plan, right, for a district or an overlay or an area on the west side or beyond the west side, or however those borders are defined. What she read out of the regulation was what happens within our planning department and our already existing code when it becomes a federally defined historic preservation area. I'm not exactly sure, but so when it becomes federally defined, certain things kick in on the city level in terms of what has to happen and how our planning department interacts and works with that particular district or area. And our planner is here, so do I have that right? I mean, that's basically it. So I think, if I could just kind of keep on going, I think what Councilor Somerville and perhaps myself and even others, I think we are hopeful of I guess, not creating burdens in the neighborhood, right? You know, hurdles too high to reach in a neighborhood that you know, is not only historic and incredibly unique, but also has income, lower socioeconomic issues associated with it. And we want something that probably retains the historic feel and look, but yet doesn't create a burden, right? And I think that's what we're all fearful of, and maybe even other members of the community might be fearful of, is once those federal regulations kick in, it could create bigger burdens or not. We don't know. And so we need to not only educate ourselves, but educate the community in terms of what those things, those regulations could be. So, and I've got folks in the back telling me that there aren't any federal regulations, which would be a stretch for me to believe, but, especially if we have it in code that certain things kick in, so.
So are there any other questions or comments from council before we go to public comment?
Can Mary address your?
Okay, I'll open the floor now to public comment.
All right.
Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Mary Hopkins. I live at 326 Corthell Road here in Laramie, Wyoming. I've been a very long time. I've lived in Wyoming my whole life. I also served as the Wyoming State Historic Preservation Officer until the end of 2020. So I have 42 years of experience in preservation, have dealt with every community in this state and the National Register of Historic Places, and so I have a lot of experience. There are no federal restrictions or guidelines for a private property owner. That is all developed through city code. So what Councilwoman Somerville read to you all is all what is done at the local level. Those restrictions were all placed by the planning department and U.S. City Council members. There are no federal restrictions. So if a person owns a property on the west side and they want to tear it down, there's no federal process. There's no requirement for them to get permission from the state or from the National Park Service. That is all done, regulated at the local level. So the National Register nomination is just a form of recognition. It says this place is important in our country's history. It reflects our local history. And I do think there's a tremendous amount of people, because I've been doing this for a long time, on the west side that are very interested in having their neighborhood recognized for the importance of its economic contribution to our city. Many of the other railroad neighborhoods in Wyoming have been recognized, just like the west side, the one in Sheridan, one in Rock Springs, the south side neighborhood in Cheyenne, and it's all the same. There's hundreds, thousands of property, private pieces of property in this state that are listed on the register, and there is no requirement from the state or the federal government. So it's all in that city code. And so there's a difference between a National Register nomination and a historic overlay. The National Register nomination is, as I said, is just a form of recognition. If you do a local city overlay and put whatever restrictions or requirements on that boundary, that's all done with U.S. City Council and the Planning Department. So yes, there's a big opportunity for education. And what we're hoping to do is to get this grant fund, because it is too much work for our board to do without a expert team to come in. We need to re-inventory the whole west side because the inventory is way too old. We will do a process of determining what is eligible, what's contributing, what's non-contributing. So then the city planning department will have a list up front that says, this address is contributing. It requires these things based upon what you do in an overlay or in code. This property is non-contributing. That property owner can do whatever they want, tear it down, rebuild. But all of that, whether you're going to put a 3-story, 10-story apartment building in the west side, is all up to to you all. It has nothing to do with the National Register nomination. So, do you have any questions for me?
Thank you for your comments. And is there any other public comment at this time? Is there anyone asking for recognition on Zoom?
Vice Mayor, I see no hands raised on Zoom.
Then I bring it back to council. Oh, did you wish to make a comment?
Make a final comment?
Yes.
So where are we now and where we would like to go, okay? So from here, what we want as our board is a working relationship with you to work through this, to figure things out, to be included in any consultations that you do with neighborhoods so that we are there to hopefully support and answer the questions that are put forward, and for us to also be informed as to what the real issues are versus, you know, different people show up for different meetings and then you hear different things. And so we would just like to be included in the process. The timeline we're working towards now, as you can tell, we're very passionate about this and would like to continue to move this forward. I think the clarity between what a city overlay and what an overlay of a historic district is by city definition versus a national register are two different things, and we definitely need to understand what is being triggered within your code and what is not, by which device. But we will be working towards going after our grant again in October. So between now and October, we would like to work through and work with you whatever process needs to be done to see whether or not we can move this forward and get that going. And that's our objective. That is our hope in being here and having this working session with you, is to develop that rapport and a way of engaging and working to go forward to that end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bard. We appreciate your comments, and we appreciate the comments of the members of the board. Seeing no other comments from the public, I return to council. And Councilor Pierce?
So I appreciate the clarification. So basically, what you're saying is the ball is in our court in terms of the code, right? So you can carry on and do preservation, right? But we will need to basically work with our planning department and figure out what is the best fit for the community, whatever that may be. And in terms of having meetings and hearings, we're going to have to be very clear for, you know, what the purpose of the city meeting is compared to the purpose of a preservation group meeting, right? Because I you know, if I'm confused, so is everybody else, right? Or at least that's my assumption that some are. So we just need to be very, very mindful of our steps, right?
And Councilor Somerville.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Councilor Pierce, I think you hit it pretty much on the head, right? So federal designation triggers the city's historic preservation code that we already have. And there are a number of places that already have historic preservation designation. If I can completely murder all of these terms, and I apologize, but there are a number of places in Laramie, different types of places that have this. So the city has one historic preservation code that applies to all those properties, or any new ones, if they receive that designation from the feds. Versus a historic overlay is really a development code overlay. It's the building could be this tall, the I don't know, could have this many windows, could be this far from the street, it could be this lot size. And I'm looking at our planning manager to tell me when I've messed that up. But it's really a completely different thing to provide development protection for the west side versus a historic preservation designation. It kind of puts them in that, unless we change the code, you have all these different eggs in one basket, because we're coming up on a holiday, and they all fall under that one city code. So any changes that we would potentially make to the historic preservation code on our end, our guidelines, our regulations, would not only affect the west side, they would affect all of those different properties. So it would be a complex process, I think, in my mind, to make changes. I think we could consider it, but I think it's pretty complex. But I do agree that I think we need to go forward with the original plan, which was letting the planning department have some meetings over on the west side, really continue to educate and get clarity. Most of my conversations, we've had that meeting, and then mine have been in 2s and 3s, over the last year from various folks and constituents in the neighborhood. And so I think more education is in mind before we roll down this hill, because a preservation designation, again, if that goes forward and they get the designation, then the ball is in our court. But now we have, a church and a bunch of other properties inside the city that all fall under that same code. We may not want to change that code for those other properties, but we're going to try to fit them in that basket. I hope that makes sense. I think we need more time and more education. I really do appreciate the passion, and I think we can get there. I just think it's a lot of education and potentially a much smaller historic preservation district on the west side than maybe was initially envisioned, with more specified buildings and less residences over there. But I think those are conversations we should have. So that's what I would ask the council to do. I can't speak for Mayor Harrington, but him and I spoke about this just a couple of days ago again, because he's been involved in those conversations. I think that's the track we're hoping to go down.
Councilor O'Doherty, or?
Does Derek want to add anything? Does Derek want to add?
He hasn't indicated such. He's actually getting smaller. But right now, we have council questions, and Councilor Newman has a question.
I don't have a question, I have a comment, I think.
Comment.
Something. I have something. And I don't want to mirror Councilor Somerville. However, I'm on their website right now looking at the owner information on what it would do if I had a property there. And one of them, which I find interesting and I want to dig into more, says that now I can have different building codes. So International Building Code Fire and Life Safety Code alternatives. I would like to know what that means, because, maybe we don't have to follow our new housing regulations if we can follow those instead. So it might be one of those other gray areas. I don't really know. And it's just the first one out of many bullet points that popped out to me.
Councilor Newman, could you clarify what website?
So I'm looking at the actual National Register of Historic Places.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
All right.
And there's a whole lot to go, but that was the first one that popped out, and I'm not even a quarter of the way through it. So I just think we need more time, more research, and I would like to go to those town meetings and whatnot as well. Thanks.
Any other comments? Councilor O'Doherty.
I was wondering, I think I know of a couple buildings like the Civic Center, and there's a building by Ace, I thought was historic. Can we ask the board to let us know what other buildings are affected? So if we changed code, and I know that's probably why Derek is cringing, because everything touches like 300 different things. Like you tweak something here, and then you have to find the many other places in code. But I'm wondering, are the places, if we could ask the board members to tell us what other places are.
Could I have a spokesman for the board, please?
Again, thank you. Off the top of my head, so Laramie has two National Register historic districts. One is the downtown, and the other one is the University neighborhood. And in the University neighborhood, which has over 300 homes on the register, and many of the downtown buildings are contributing versus non-contributing, but I do believe all of the buildings in the university neighborhood are contributing to the National Register. So that goes from basically, if you could look on a map, I believe from somewhere around 4th Street all the way up to 15th. It's a very big district. Then you also have...
South of Grand?
Yeah, it goes south of Grand, north and south of Grand.
Where would that be, north and south? The boundary 4th to 15th, and where is it north to south?
It goes, I could get you a map. We can get you further information on the district boundaries. Then you've got various individual buildings listed. So the Old Main is on the register. The Cooper House on the university campus. The Civic Center that you mentioned. The West Side School, the Territorial Prison. There's just many, 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 many buildings here in Laramie.
Just prior to demolition.
And so all of the buildings on campus are eligible. Pretty much, there's a historic preservation plan for the University of Wyoming campus, and the core area around Old Main, Prexy's pasture, they're all contributing. As you go farther out from that core area, there's different designations, but that's all, it's not formally listed, but it is considered eligible. So there's numerous properties already within your jurisdiction that are on the register and that have probably already had things happen under your code that were not reviewed, so.
Well, thank you for answering that question. Are there any other, Councilor O'Doherty?
So that tells me it's not very restrictive because there are some houses that are in pretty bad repair near the university that are like student ghetto type structures. So I don't know. Well, I know some of these historic preservation people. I will ask them at my own time. Thanks.
I've heard several comments related to a feeling that we do need more time. And my question is, does council think that it's more of a linear process? Or could it be a concurrent process where at this point, it is not actually an historic designation, but rather doing the research to determine if it would even qualify as such, and would that research contribute to our own knowledge and how to work with the district? So are these topics that we could work with concurrently? Councilor Somerville.
Vice Mayor, maybe a little bit of both. I think the overwhelming concern I have is that we end up, the research is done. My understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected, is that the preservation group can submit the application without anything to do with the city council, right? So our blessing is not necessary. So if they go forward with this, I mean, we could end up at a spot where we end up with a preservation neighborhood, and over there that the neighbors don't want, and then it does come to council with our problem with all of these other properties to consider, in terms of our historic preservation code, that's not the ideal situation to be in. My hope is that we can develop a stronger consensus and education. So the way I think the mayor and I had talked about this process is having, a meeting or two over on the west side to do education, really talking about, both of them, because it's possible to do both of them together. It's not necessarily an either-or process.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
Talk about the size of the preservation neighborhood, what interest there is there, and I'm sensitive to their timeline. If the planning department can do these meetings here and, I'd say sometime before August maybe, if we can get those on the calendar, then I think that would allow us to take a more linear process and then maybe have a moment in September prior to the grant deadline, or maybe even late August, where we could come back together and really talk about, the feedback that we heard from the neighbors, what they really want. I would like to avoid council being in the crosshairs between a preservation district that's not wanted. Unfortunately, the majority of people that I've talked to do not want it at this point in time, so I think it's important to have a better consensus in education. And then we can decide at that point how potentially we move forward with, supporting their grant application or something along those lines, but that's, I think, what I'm hoping for.
Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. When you go forward with your preservation work and you submit the stuff to the feds, right? The feds, yeah. I used to work for the feds, but anyway, do you have to have signatures from the neighborhood? Do you have to have a certain percentage in agreement? I mean, what are your parameters roughly, or requirements?
The state is required to notify all the property owners, and property owners can object to the listing. They need to do that in a written notarized form. Those are submitted to the National Park Service along with the nomination. There's a percentage of that is calculated on how many people object, whether or not it is listed. So if you have a majority of objection, it will not be listed.
Okay.
You have to have property owner support. And not to speak for Karen, but we, just from my position when I worked for the state, we never wanted to go forward with anything without the support of the community. It's just not good policy. So that's why, and I think obviously we have a lot of work to do. We don't have a boundary. We don't know what's contributing. We don't know all these things yet. And we can't do that without a contractor who is capable of putting all the documentation together, because there has to be a mountain of paperwork done, and our board cannot tackle that without a consultant. So that's why we're asking for your support so we can get the money. Then we still have, once this project's done, we'll still have work to do, because people could say, I object, and then that person gets cut out of the boundary. So there's a lot of finagle on this. It's not just, we decide here's a boundary. It is all give and take as you go along.
And you're literally knocking on doors and having them fill out questionnaires, or asking them questions, or informing them, or
That's the intent of our legwork for our match to that grant, is to work with individual property owners. I'm certain people will object. We will have objections.
Right.
But I do think that neighborhood really deserves this designation. It elevates people's perception of the area. It elevates their worthiness of it. So, and just because they're not architectural masterpieces doesn't mean they aren't important to our community. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I think the critical piece of the work that we're requesting to be done is the fact that, yes, there is the west side, and it's this, right? But when we do this work and we define the historic significance of West Side, the boundary of this historic district may be this, and we don't know, the residents don't know. Are they going to fit inside this district? Is their property going to be inside, or is it not? We don't have those answers, and the residents don't have those answers until this work is done. And so when we hear people objecting versus people supporting, who knows? The people objecting could be the people who have a modern office in that area, and they're concerned about it being included in this district. And it may not be in this district, and they may not be impacted, but that's the voices you're hearing. Versus someone who has been living there all their life, they're in a home that's 75 years old, it's precious to them. So we have different voices. Until we actually do the work and define what this district will be, we don't know where these voices fall, inside or outside of that district.
Thank you, Ms. Baird. If you could just stay there for a minute in case we have other questions. And Councilor Newman.
So our city manager sent us an email, I clicked on it. There's 19 different houses or districts in Laramie. So it looks like there's maybe 3 districts, and then the others are just buildings.
Individuals.
Yeah, is kind of what it looks like. Just took, I think that was O'Doherty's question, so I wanted to just
And we're
put
just
that out there.
wanting to add one more.
Yes. Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, for your indulgence. Just a quick question, again, making sure that I've got accurate information. The document with all the pretty pink dots that you gave us, the map, so it said there was identified 388 historic buildings. When I pull up that map, it's the majority of the buildings on the west side been designated. Is that from the last inventory that was done 13 years ago?
Those are not designated, they're just 50 years or older.
Okay.
Those are just buildings in the neighborhood that are 50 years or older that have site documentation of some form or another. They might not necessarily have been part of those 2 inventories, that someone could have done it themselves or it could have been part of a different project. They're just old.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. So those would potentially be considered, that
Yes.
we could start with that map?
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, comments from council? Councilor O'Doherty.
So getting the study done seems like a good place to start, and it would allow people to voice their, learn about it, and we'd have feedback. So I don't think you have to worry so much about being in the crosshairs, except for how our city code affects that. But I have to say, looking at houses between 4th and 15th near the university, we're not really heavy-handed there. I kind of wish we were. So, when there's the add-on shed that becomes an apartment and the add-on to that, and doors hanging off. So I don't really know what it gains having the district, because of what I'm thinking of in the university neighborhood. But I think the way to start is to have the study, so you know what you're working with, and, yeah, thanks.
I think it could offer valuable information that we could then utilize in looking at our own code. Does anyone else on council? Councilor Somerville?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I feel like I'm doing a lot of lifting here without the mayor here tonight, but I know that we have talked, it's really important, based on the meetings that we've had, that the education takes place in the neighborhood of what is what prior to any additional works for contacts. There was a lot of neighbors that thought that the preservation district was essentially what a historic overlay was, that it would provide development protection, it would stop townhouses from being, built. They had certain ideas. That is not the case. It is really important to do the education first. So I have some serious hesitancy in actively supporting a grant, saying we'll support a grant application today. I would probably feel differently once we've done the educative work with the planning department and had some of those meetings and done more education. And if the grant's not due until October, I think we have the time to do that. So I guess I would really ask the council to just support right now, having the planning department do those meetings, doing the education, and then coming back here late in the summer and then having this conversation again. That neighborhood there's a lot of vulnerable people that live in that neighborhood. As the Councilor Pierce has stated, there's a lot of folks that are lower socioeconomic status. There's a lot of fear over there about what's being built and what could be built in their neighborhoods, and I just don't want to drive us to a bad decision. And the overwhelming response I've gotten right now from the neighborhood is absolutely not. We don't want this. So I guess I would really ask council to just pause for a second, let's do education and come back at the end of the summer.
So I'm going to turn it back over for public comment.
Thanks.
Could you say your name, please?
My name is Eric Sandine. I'm a member of the Preservation Board. I directed the American Studies program for 32 years and part of that program was an historic preservation track, so I'm sort of 2 levels up from field work when it comes to historic preservation. And our program has been working with the West Side since I'd say probably about the early 90s. And we originally focused on the West Side School and development of that as an historic site. One of the things that impresses me about the place is what Councilor Somerville is talking about, is the energy in the neighborhood. I mean, you may not know exactly where the boundaries of the West Side would be, but when you're over there, the energy is unmistakable, and the sense of community and tradition. And I think one of the benefits of doing a project like this is the education that Councilor Somerville is talking about. It's allowing people to describe the community that they live in, and there's a template for that in the form and in the grant, to talk to each other about objections or fears or uncertainties. And a lot of the people in the neighborhood are economically vulnerable and fearful of what might happen in that neighborhood with a certain kind of development. And the process is actually as important as the product. That if people can come together with half the energy that we've seen over there in the last 20 years, you'll have a remarkable outcome, whether it results in an historic district or not. Produce the documentation, have the meetings, take the photographs, and honor the kind of working class life that's always been the core of that neighborhood, and we'll see where it ends up. I think it's not unlike what happened in the university district nomination, where our program over the course of a couple of years did a lot of public presentations, and what came out in the end was not what people thought at the beginning. So it is an educational process, and I just wanted to sort of step back and consider it as that more than just the mechanics of how to do something like this.
Thank you for your comments.
I would just like to go ahead and reiterate, we are 100% in support of Councilwoman Somerville's comments. I mean, we do not want to move forward without the support of the neighborhood, without the support of the city, and without support of the county. We sit at the county level, you guys are sitting in here. But what our objective was today was to start the conversation between our board and the council to see what steps need to be taken in order to try and move this down. And her comments about education in the neighborhood and clarity and getting everything ironed out and as in focus as possible during this summer is what is needed. And we just want to be part of that process, working together with you as the council. And hopefully we can make that deadline by October. And if it's not until next October, well, maybe that's the way it will be. But that would not be our wish. But we are prepared to work with you throughout this summer, to work with the West Side, to get this clarity, to get the education, and to the learning and everything together so that this can be successful. Can we go forward with this nomination without your approval? Yes. Do we want to? Absolutely not. That is not where we are. That is not what we want, and it has never been in our mind to do that. But what we want is to be included and be working with you to work this to whatever end it comes to. Thank you.
Counselor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was educated tonight, so I think that's great, right? I learned something, and I think the rest of the community needs to learn these things as well. So, yeah, I think it's good. I'm happy. I learned something.
And I think the board offers a tremendous amount of knowledge, skill, history, process, et cetera, that could be extremely valuable for the planners and for council as we move forward. And I think collaboration and partnership may help facilitate bringing it forward so that we all wind up on the same page and that we have the consensus of the community. Any other comments or questions? All right, well, we thank you very much. We appreciate your passion, and we appreciate the time you put in to coming and to presenting to us. And I also come out of this meeting more educated about the process than I came into it.
Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate being put on your agenda and being allowed this time with you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So next, we'll move toward city council updates. Does anyone have any updates? Councilor Pierce?
Yeah, Counselor Shumway, I don't know if you can hear me or not, 'cause I might need some of your help here. We attended the urban renewal, and I'm forgetting the name of the committee, meeting this past week, and we're really successful, actually, at removing 45th Street from, or USAC.
Systems Advisory.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I'm like, without me knowing.
What was she talking about? Yeah, so that meeting happened this past week, and very successful outcomes in terms of the removal of 45th from, yeah, well, A, from the priority list, and B, off the city maps. So that was really, really good.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce. Anyone else? Well, I just want to say that I participated with the Laramie Police Department in interviewing new candidates, and it was a very interesting process to be with LPD and to see that and to participate as part of the city. So
Cool.
that may be an opportunity for others of you. All right.
I do.
Yes.
I have some of this, it's kind of related, but not really. Chief, I went through your guys' active shooter at work presentation, and I thought that was great. So thanks for putting those on for us.
Vice Mayor.
Next,
Counselor
Oh.
Shumway.
Counselor Shumway.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Councilor Pierce mentioned that the Urban Systems Advisory Committee did remove 45th from the map, and from considerations it's obviously in a very sensitive area over the aquifer, and so it's one that the city's not at this time moving to develop with funding from the monies that are available. Also, there's one meeting that was postponed. It's going to be on Thursday, and that's with the Traffic Safety Commission Subcommittee. I'll report back with that after we meet. The third item that I had is I went to the regional meeting with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities, and we had updates on all of the items on the legislative, items, bills, and things that they had. Two that were huge impacts for us were first of all, we received an addition to the direct distribution funding, which comes to the city of Laramie, and then the other had to do with, there's many of them, but I reported already that we're going to have 8 new bar, grill, and entertainment licenses that we'll have available to the city, 4 in July of this year and 4 more, I believe it's in July of 2025. But anyway, I'm looking forward. I appreciate all the great information that we received tonight, and I won't comment on that, but I think it was very, very educational and very informative. Obviously, we're all doing what we can to make sure that every portion of our community is treated with, making sure that we do everything possible to make it so that all the residents feel comfortable. That's all I have to report right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Shumway. With no other reports, we'll go to agenda review. Counselor Gabriel.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I was just curious, since Chief Brown is here, on the consent agenda, we have an item that says an MOU between Laramie County Sheriff's Office and the Laramie Police Department. Could you comment on that briefly?
Good evening.
Good evening.
So that agenda item is in reference to, we are updating all of our MOUs due to new leadership in the police department and myself. We're also had them reviewed by the city attorney's office to make sure they're in compliance with state ordinances and laws. And that one in particular, I believe, is the last one. We've updated our Rollins MOU, Cheyenne MOU, University of Wyoming MOU, and Albany County Sheriff's Department MOU. And in the state of Wyoming, because of jurisdictional boundary restrictions with law enforcement, MOUs are what department leaderships use to have mutual aid when they're needed for specific events. Frontier Days would be a good example with Cheyenne, or Jubilee Days here in Laramie. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Oh, Counselor Pierce.
Yeah, do we ever do an MOU with the state, the state in terms of troopers or the feds?
So we don't, because they have different jurisdictional requirements, because the Highway Patrol is allowed to work throughout the state. So if we need any assistance from them, and we do typically, especially with traffic collisions that you'll see on the 80, but they can come into Laramie and work also. And then the same thing with the federal government. The federal government has jurisdiction over the United States. So they come in and help us specifically with DCI operations, task force operations. We'll see that frequently.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other comments on the agenda?
Vice Mayor, if I could just note for you, I'm not sure if we missed Judy Snoke earlier in public comment, but she does have her hand raised.
Oh, we didn't.
We didn't do the last public comment. I think we skipped it.
I would now like to open the floor to any public comments.
Do we have any public comments? Okay, seeing none? Oh.
Judy's there.
Is Judy? Oh, there she is.
It just takes a moment. Sorry.
Yes, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I haven't done this in so long. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Sharon, and thank you, all members of the council. I want to emphasize and what many counselors have said tonight about how educational this process was this evening. I learned a lot, and I love to learn new things. So thank you. Best wishes. I hope all of you do well. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Any further comments? Seeing none, then I would say this meeting is adjourned.